This is the myth-busting portion of the session. So, let's go back. There we go. So this is one of my least favorite myths. Those of you who know me know that I have been active in customer success for almost 20 years now. I've been here since sort of the beginning of the SaaS iteration on software sales, and I hear it a lot, the idea that customer success is a cost center. Who here has fought that notion in their life? Yeah, there's a lot of that, right? So this is the thing. We all have to fight this notion because it's false. It's a myth, so go like that, no more. We're not gonna do that anymore. And it's important for 3 reasons. You need to know that you are not a cost center because you need to have dollar signs by your name. Oh, there we go, there we go. We all need dollar signs by our names, right? So it's really important that as you are thinking about your career, both at your current company and down the road, that you're demonstrating the business impact of the work that you personally do, that your team does. It's really critical that we are demonstrating that value in as concrete a way as possible. And the notion that customer success is a cost center disambiguates your work or attenuates your work from the impact that it's having. So you want to make sure that you're demonstrating that value. And then why is it important for your customers? Or for your company? It's important for your company because existing customers are the foundation of subscription revenue. I would imagine almost all of us work for some kind of X as a service company. There's some kind of subscription notion to the business that you run. Now, back in the day, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, the most of the revenue did come up in the very first part of the sale. You bought perpetual licensed software, you paid a lot of money for it, you installed it on a box in your premises, and then you paid a maintenance fee on it. But when we moved to a subscription model, that model changed. And this notion of customer success as a cost center really comes from this old way of thinking about it. If you think about the world that we live in today, what you're doing is you're amortizing the value of that customer over a much longer period of time. Most customers, the cost of acquisition, the CAC, payback is 5 to 12 months. And for a high growth, early stage startup, it could be even more. So if you're losing that customer in the first 12 months, you paid money for the benefit of servicing that customer who then walked out the door. And so it's really important that we start with retention. We talked about that this morning, right? The importance of retention. And Rob called out that retention compounds over time, and so does churn. So if you think about if your customers, typically the ones you retain, grow 20% year over year, the dollar that you lose this year is not just a dollar you lost this year. It's a dollar next year plus the 20 cents you were going to get for that dollar in customer growth. And the year after that, it was going to be $1.40. So over time, that is compounding, whether to the good or to the bad. But it's not, so we have to make sure that we are selling to our new customers, we're making new friends. Sorry for everybody that has now got this song stuck in their head if you were a Girl Scout like I was. So we have to make sure that we are not just selling to our new customers, we're not just chasing them, but we're also staying close to our existing customers. And one of the reasons we have to do that is not just the retention, it's not just holding on to what we have, it's also because selling back to those customers is so much easier, so much faster, and so much cheaper. Success rates with existing customers can approach 60 to 70% as opposed to perhaps 10 to 20% for a prospect. It's faster, those sales cycles are typically half as long, and it's cheaper. It can cost you sometimes $1.28 to get $1 of revenue from a new customer. An existing customer, you can get a new $1 of revenue for 18 cents. So who then should be responsible for selling into those existing customers? Who does that work? And as the meme says, why not both? It's really important that we make best friends with our sales team, because there are really 3 different types of revenue that you're going to get from your existing customers, and what you want to do is bring the sharpest spear to the point of attack. So if you think about it on a continuum, on one side, you've got selling activity that really feels like hunting. It feels like new customer deals, even if it's an existing customer. It's a customer where you're going in with a totally new use case, a totally different product, to a team that doesn't know you, doesn't have a relationship with you or your business, and you really need the sales team to take the lead on that. CS can certainly support that effort, but the sales team should be leading on that side. On the other side, again, in a subscription business, you're going to have very organic growth. You're going to have revenue that comes from those customers that is directly tied to their usage of the product and the value that they get. That could be additional seats or licenses. It could be consumption if your product has some kind of consumption element. It could be buying up to additional feature functionality. But in those cases, CS should be leading that conversation. You heard it in the last talk, right? If the salesperson is in the room, that almost makes the customer pull back. It almost makes them say, whoa, 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 I don't know if I want to do this. This feels salesy, right? But if the CSM, the account manager, whatever the title is at your side, the person who owns that ongoing relationship is spending time with the customer, helping them get the most value, and incidentally, that is now growing them from $1 to $1.20, that's great, right? That is a perfect scenario where the salesperson doesn't even need to spend their time. And by the way, they can then take their time and go sell more new deals. And in the middle, you've got this third bucket, which is the idea that there are going to be revenue streams from your existing customers where there needs to be that very tight interlock. A good example of this would be a new product to the team that you're already working with, where you need someone to come in and broker a commercial deal. You need someone to take some time to walk them through the value proposition and introduce them to some new things. But you also need the allyship of the CSM, the CS person who's in the room with that customer all the time. Another example would be a closely allied team with a new use case. Same product, new use case, new team. You can have that existing team act as a reference and support that sale so that the folks that haven't worked with you before have an inside knowledge of what your company can do for that customer. Okay, so who has heard or said we're not sales? I feel like this is one of the things that I hear from my team. So if you think about this myth of CS as a cost center, there's kind of 2 components to it, right? There's the CFO saying, well, do we really need to hire more salespeople? If we hire AEs, I know that AE is going to take 18 months to ramp, but once she's ramped, she's going to deliver her quota every quarter. There's revenue associated with that. And the CFO says, do I hire an AE? Do I hire a CSM? And says, let's hire a CFO. Or let's hire an AE. But on the other side of that, you've got CS professionals who are very nervous about being perceived as salesy, right? They get a lot of value and self-worth out of helping customers be successful. That's why we do this job. We like to help people. We like to get customers to the outcomes that they want to be at, and we don't want to feel like we're shoving something down a customer's throat. And so I'm going to now give you 3 things, 3 ways to think about this for yourself and with your team, to think about how do you drive more revenue within your existing customer base in a way that feels natural and in alignment with the things that give us joy at work as CS professionals. Okay, so the first one is be strategic. You've got to have a plan. You've got to understand where your customer is and where they're going. We've talked a lot today about the customer journey. And when we talk about the customer journey, we often think of it as linear, or sometimes I've seen it depicted as a helix, right? Comes around, goes back around like this. But the reality is, if you turn that journey on its side, it's a funnel. Sales teams and RevOps teams spend a lot of time thinking about how they can maximize prospects through a sales cycle. we should be doing the same thing when we think about customers going through their customer journey. If you think about what we're trying to do is get them to those later stages of the customer journey. They start out in that onboarding phase that we talked about this morning. They've got to get through an adoption phase. Sometimes customers are great and bluebirds land in our laps and they buy things while they're still in onboarding. But for the most part, the bulk of the expansion is going to come from those later stages. So you've got to minimize time to value, get them through onboarding and adoption, and get them to the point where they're seeing full value from that initial purchase. And that then unlocks the opportunity to renew them, to expand them, and make them an advocate. So it's really important to think about the customer journey as a funnel. While you're working, getting customers through that funnel, you've got to partner with the sales team. We had a breakout, we had a lot of great conversation about this. I think the key here is having a really clear account plan, understanding what needs to happen for internally, who needs to be doing what to get that customer through that funnel to the point where they're ready to make another purchase. That means understanding what we want to get out of that relationship. We're trying to drive towards a renewal. We're trying to drive towards an introduction to someone in another department. And then having a very clear action plan. Who owns getting that introduction? Who's going to have a conversation with someone on the customer side? When is that going to happen? What's the status of that? Meeting very regularly. My teams, I expect them to have at least bi-weekly account team syncs. So they should be meeting with the SE, the AE on those accounts at least every other week to align on the account plan and make sure that everybody is holding each other accountable in the nicest way possible for getting these things done so that we can move forward. But then, of course, we don't want to forget the success plan. The account plan is internal. I mean, it's not a dirty secret. We could share with the customer that we want an introduction to somebody on another team, but the customer is really thinking about what's in it for them. The success plan is how they are getting to value, because if they don't get to value, none of this matters. And so making sure that just like you have that internal plan, you have an account or a success plan with your customer, and you're making sure that they're getting the outcomes they expected. Then you need to make sure you really understand your customer's business. We had a good conversation in our breakout group about the scenario where someone purchases, but someone else is the end user, someone else is implementing it. Understanding who are all the players, what are their goals, what's important to them. Get really close to your customers. Go see them, go out on the floor, go to the factory. My boss was just telling me about a time when he went to a chainsaw factory in Sweden, right? You'll learn a lot if you actually get very, very close to your customers and their businesses. And then the other thing is understanding your own business. It's amazing to me that sometimes I talk to CSMs and they don't really understand the pricing structure. They don't understand what are the levers. You could spend a lot of time working on a customer to drive up consumption, but if they've got an all-you-can-eat contract where they're not actually metered in that way, yeah, you're helping them be successful, but it's not actually contributing to revenue growth. So really understanding what are the different levers, what kinds of things do we as a company charge for, what are those prices, how does that tie back to what the customers are doing. And then finally, don't forget that revenue generation isn't just about your existing customers. Your existing customers becoming advocates unlocks lead generation from success stories and case studies, and also will radically shorten your sales cycles. So the second thing I want to talk about is being a scientist. Get curious. Ask questions of your customer, ask for introductions, get as much information as possible, have that learner's mindset, and then experiment, try things. One of the things that we were talking about earlier is, sometimes you're in a situation where not every customer has a CSM. That's actually a good scenario to be in because you've got a control group. If you start changing everything all at once, you have a problem with attribution. You can't just, what did I do that made that great outcome happen? Retention got better, but why? Was it that I went from a QBR to an MVR? Was it that we upskilled our team? So if you're doing so many things all at once, it can be really challenging to know what you did differently that led to that result. But if you had a before and an after, you didn't have this team and now you do, that gives you some information. Or if you have cohorts, if you've got one cohort that you're doing QBRs with and one cohort that you're doing MBRs with, then you can compare the results and figure out, okay, did A group or B group do better? Look for patterns, dig into the data, talk to your teams, do postmortems when you lose customers, really look for the patterns and the leading indicators for both risk and opportunity. And make sure that you're collecting as much data as possible. It can be challenging. Not all of our products have good telemetry. Sometimes you really run into blockers here, but get as much data as possible and iterate. The next thing I want to talk about is tracking your results, and this goes back again to being a scientist. You know, everybody's data points are going to be a little different because your business is different from everyone else's. So, for example, if you have a very small number of white glove customers in a CSM's book, if they've got 2 customers who all have 3-year terms, then, you know, logo retention is probably not a meaningful metric for your business, but you might look at gross expansion revenue instead. Make sure that you're tracking things like referenceability and the impact of references. So we talked about NPS. There was a little bit of maybe myth busting around NPS in the last session, but referenceability is where the rubber hits the road, right? You can ask somebody, would you recommend us to a friend or a colleague? But if you haven't actually asked them, would you do that? And had them say yes, it's really easy for them to check 10 on a box, right? It's a little different when they actually do take a call with a prospect or record a video testimonial for you. And then understand the impact of that, right? Measure that. What happens to your deal cycles when you introduce those references? Look at the number of leads that your team is generating. Jess and I worked at a company where this was part of the CS comp plan. We expected them as kind of a gate to their bonus to generate a certain number of leads. They didn't necessarily have to close them. They were, in many cases, kind of kicking them over the fence to a sales team, but they were expected to have that mentality of listening for what is that customer saying that could be generating a lead? Where is there a pain point that our additional products could solve or help for them? Then I think, you know, another thing that people overlook sometimes, and I talked about it earlier, right? What is your cost of acquisition for your new deals versus selling into an existing customer, and how do those 2 things compare? Ultimately, you want to really look at what matters to your business, your C-suite, your board. And then the other thing I want to say about this that I think is very powerful is, how do you quantify these metrics? How do you take that impact on the sales cycle or that lower cost of acquisition and start to actually put a dollar sign by that and say, this is how much money this generates back to our business because the CS team is doing this work. I was in a role, another place that Jess and I worked at, where we did not have CSMs on all of our accounts. It had been like an on-prem perpetual license business. They didn't have customer success. They were kind of building it out in phases. And so one of the exercises that I had to do on the regular was go back to leadership and say, here are the results. Give me 10 more CSMs so I can cover another cohort of customers. And as part of that exercise, I got really, really good at building that business case and saying, we've got CSMs on these accounts, we don't have CSMs on these accounts, and we're seeing this many more deals. The NRR is this much higher. The retention is this much higher. We're getting this many references from this cohort that has CSMs, and all of that quantifies to a certain dollar amount that then you can say, if you hire 10 CSMs, the payback on that in 6 months, you'll get your ROI. You'll be at a break-even point in 6 months, and from there on out, that will actually be generating revenue for you, even though it's not necessarily a signed contract. But we're tying it back to dollar savings or revenue that's actually created for the company. And then the last one I want to talk about is being a storyteller. So this is, who doesn't love reading Rainbow, right? This is really, really important too, right? Use that data, use all that great data that you're collecting to construct a narrative. You want to think about what is the thing that the team did? What outcome did that drive for our customer? How did it lead them to the value that we promised them in the sales cycle? And then what did that do for our business? How did that actually result in a positive outcome for our business? Being able to tell that story will really help you share your success with your leadership team. And then also going back to your customers and saying, this is my customer contact. This is the great work they're doing. This is the value they're realizing from our product. Sharing that with their leadership, sharing that cross-functionally, that unlocks additional growth opportunity within that organization. And then you can turn that same great story, situation, action, result. Customer had this problem. They took this action working with us and our product. They had this business result. That case study generates leads. You can take it to other customers who maybe aren't using that same product or have, don't have that use case activated within your product, and turn that into additional revenue within those accounts. So the thing that I want to end with here is that success really does breed success. If you think about that kind of myth that CSMs have of I'm not a salesperson, then what we really have to get back to is the idea that if you are driving your customer to be successful and achieve their goals, that then in a virtuous cycle leads to your business and your employer being successful. And for those of us that work at early stage companies, that literally is money in our pockets if we're shareholders. But ultimately, it also gives you great stories for your career so that you can then, within your current company or down the road when you are interviewing elsewhere, have good examples of the ways in which you've had impact on business results. So let's go make things happen. We've got about 5 minutes for questions. Who has a question? David.
So, not really a question, but just a comment I wanted to highlight because I loved sharing the successes. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we did, we use Gong for customer recording, mm-hmm. and we use Slack for inter-office communications. So we actually have a customer stories channel in Slack that all of a lot of people in the company are subscribed to.
I love
and
it.
when we get a good a snippet, somebody talking about a new feature release, somebody talking about something great, we take that snippet, we put it in there, and everybody in the company sees it. I hate that CS is a hidden endeavor, and I want to make sure that we show our successes. And I think when we do that, it just really reiterates the value of what we do here. So
yeah, I think it's such a great point, David. And I think too often we think about elevating our customers' voices when they're complaining, right? We think of the feedback loop is customer is unhappy, they talk to a CSM, that CSM is like a bridge to a function within the org, and they're taking that kind of complaint back.
Right.
But being able to share when customers are happy and things
Right.
are working is really powerful.
Love it.
Hi, Melissa. How do you see this playing into the renewal world specifically when you talk about it being a cost center and ownership across like sales or CS? I know I've been in organizations where we have account management teams or where CSMs own renewals. And I think in the current economy, it's even scarier when renewals happen and we are seeing contracts get smaller sometimes and things mm-hmm. like that. Where do you see that kind of like fitting into the world of CS roles in today's economy?
Yeah, I think it's such a good question because you're right. Renewals can sit in a lot of places. Some companies have a dedicated renewals team. Some companies, the AE owns it. Sometimes CSMs own it. But if you've got someone in a role that's a value realization role, so like at my current company, my team is called TAMs, but they're not really traditional technical account managers. They're more like very technical CSMs. Whatever the name of that role, if there's someone who is working day to day, month to month, driving customers to value, even if they don't own the commercial process of getting sign off, they are still having a huge impact on both renewal and growth, right? You could take them completely out of all commercial activities, and the reality is, in the absence of that team, the renewal rate would go down, the upsell rate would go down. And so I think you've got to connect those dots. What ultimately matters is not did that person have ownership of that business process, but did they have impact on the results that we saw in that business process?
Piggybacking on that, do you have any tips for how you start to think about quantifying exactly what you just articulated?
Yeah, I think it goes back to those slides earlier, right? Being able to connect the dots between customers. We did this thing with this group of customers. They had this outcome that helped them realize value, and that resulted in this business outcome of better renewal rates. Tracking all of those things, and this is where I think attribution can be a challenge, right? If you've got a lot of hands in those accounts, everybody's going to want to claim credit. And a lot of times we probably are, as CS professionals, a little humble or a little reluctant to go, that was me, I was the star. But the reality is, if you're doing some of these experiments and you've got some of this A/B testing, you can say, okay, well, the AE owned it in both scenarios, but in this cohort, we had a CSM apply. This is actually what we did at Blackbaud, right? We had a CSM on this cohort. On this cohort, we only had an AE. On this cohort, we had significantly higher NRR. Hard to argue with that when there's an AE in both scenarios, but only a CSM on the other.
That's what I've seen too, as you have a segment that's not with a CSM, and then you can, I'm wondering if Lane's idea too with the at-risk CTA, if there's a way to do that with like a value intervention CTA as well.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
We have time for another.